let's cue the music and start that word chat.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to that word chat. Great to see you all. We're doing a show despite some last minute change. If you didn't see the emails and you just showed up expecting John Kelly, John was supposed to be our guest today. He had an emergency involving a pet. We don't know the outcome, but it sounds like a pretty awful thing happened to his dog. And so he's unable to make it today. But we wish him well, and we're happy. We're really thrilled because we have Kelly Elizabeth Wright, who's been on the show before. She's always fun to talk to. She's been on the Word of the Year episodes and talked about words of the year. We were going to talk about slang largely with John, and we'll get him back and reschedule and do that. But Kelly also has something to say about slang. She teaches it, and she's sort of the guru for new words to the American Dialect Society. It's a pleasure to see you, Kelly. Thanks for coming from Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Appreciate the last minute change, and also and you saw Heather wasn't here. Heather had a conflict, so Sarani is always quick to step up, and thank you for doing that, and thank you for getting the social media out on the change very quickly, and thank you to Erin Brenner, who's been just a terrific friend of the show from the start, and she's doing our social media, filling in today. So everybody's filling in except me. I'm gonna try to not talk too much and let Kelly talk. But here's I want to start with not necessarily. I want to talk about new words, and that's sort of your area. But it occurs to me your area of focus is in language of race and how language is used to other and to make assessments about people's worthiness. And we're in an era now where words that we thought were innocuous and fine are suddenly given new meaning. And you're in academia. My wife is in academia, so I hear what's going on there. It's an awkward spot where you're not a federal employee, but you receive federal funding. So what's it like, and what's the mood in Madison right now?
Yeah, wow. Great question. Jumping right into the deep end. For me, it's the mood in Madison is very supportive. I feel like if there were buzzwords, or watchwords that some sort of sorting algorithm was going to do through all, state university employee research, I would get flagged. I would get flagged at every possible angle. I've been reassured, keep doing what you're doing. You specifically aren't going to get fired, right?
Yeah.
I think that the main concern has been, at least from the upper management, with federal funding. And I know a handful of colleagues from here and other places have had their funding frozen from the NIH, like someone who was looking at biodiversity and moths right?
Yeah.
Biodiversity, right, is
Oh
something
dear.
that is on the DE and I, chopping block. And so I feel like whatever methods they are using right now, or it is a blunt instrument that is being taken to these kinds of things. And I maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I'm in this stage where I just got this job, and so I am preparing to apply for new sources of federal funding, whereas these other folks, have spent years in that application process and have just received that funding, made plans, hired people, and now it's being jerked away. So that's
Yeah.
very, very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, and of course it is like you say, it's a blunt instrument, and it's sort of a thing that we assume will be, once the dust settles, we'll have the at least some of the funding back. But it's those programs that may stand out for being different, that maybe don't see their funding come back. So are you? So you said it's a comfortable place, and Madison is sort of this liberal town, but it's Wisconsin. I mean, is that kind of a cultural thing for you to go from you're in Virginia as a postdoc, right, and now you're in Wisconsin? So what was that transition like?
It's I think in some ways it's been a welcome one. I feel like the it's this is my first time living in a capital city. So the folks who are making the decisions for the state are literally right next door, which
Hmm.
is different than anywhere I've been. In Virginia, it was I voted in 3 elections there, including the general,
Hmm.
and there was essentially nothing on the ballot. They were not asking our county to make choices about anything. I felt very ineffective while I was there. And
Did you
here,
mean there weren't any local issues, or there weren't any issues?
no, like nothing, like not the
Yeah.
school board,
Oh,
like nothing. Like we just were, I don't know, showing up and saying yes or no to these, an incumbent running unopposed,
yeah.
essentially for a handful of things. And so that, um, even though like I grew up in Tennessee, I
Yeah.
voted in Tennessee for most of the elections that I voted in have been there, and that wasn't the case. I mean, at least there was even like, a policy change or some sort of language here and there, on any local election. So that
Hmm.
was different. And here, people are very involved and attentive to what's going on at the Capitol. And there have been, some pendulum swings with like conservative or leadership here in Wisconsin, but I think people people are hopeful that um yeah, that our like at least our basic services are going to be upheld. I know that sounds like,
Yeah.
is that something to be excited about? But,
Sure.
but grateful for it. Yeah.
Well, in as a linguist, I mean, you and it used to be that you draw parallels to other periods of history where language has been used, and you compare things to 1984, George Orwell, and people say, "Oh yeah, yeah, sure, you're you're being a little bit over the top there, aren't you?" But this is kind of weird. I mean, this is unprecedented, I think, in my lifetime. Now, I'm not a linguist, so I'm not as an observer of it, perhaps as much. But can you think of a parallel where where certain words are like flagged as being problematic?
You know, I think maybe an interesting historical example in recent memory comes from um the politically correctness like movements that maybe
Hmm.
this is in some ways a response to, but
Yeah.
in the early 90s and these other periods, like we got things like chairperson and flight attendant and mail carrier and police officer, right? Like
Hmm.
the police officer is one of my favorite examples to use because we don't even question or think we don't think about that at all anymore. It's police officer. Police officers
Yeah.
describe themselves that way, right?
Mhm.
And there was a real pointed like effortful, organized group of people who said that kind of gendered language is simply not appropriate. There is a better way to describe what we're doing. I don't think that those are the same arguments that are being made,
No.
but I do think that there is this example of purposeful, active, organization around changing everyday language can and does happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, I mean, a lot of people think language is just what it is and it's what they learned in school, but it is, people really do, there's a lot of effort to change the language.
Yeah.
So let's talk, I wanted to change the subject, but I don't want to change the subject
Oh,
too
no,
early.
no, it's okay. Please.
But let's talk about some of the language that is, now we talked to just last month. Oh my goodness, was it just last month? The words of the year, and some of the new words, and I like to go over some of those in more detail than we had time for last time.
Yeah.
But you mentioned that you're teaching a class. So what are you teaching now? And do you just get totally geeked out talking to your students about the words they're using that are, new and fresh?
Yeah, very much so. So I'm teaching two courses this semester.
Okay,
One is on profanity. It's called
can I undo it?
Things You Can't
Can I
Say.
make it?
Yeah, Things You Can't Say, which I've taught before, but it's my first time teaching here, and I haven't taught in a full semester since 2018. So there's been a lot of lexical shift. And then I'm also teaching sociophonetics, which is fascinating. It's fascinating. It's maybe not as lexically inclined, but it's really nice to get deep into the theory about the ways in which individuals like perform and perceive identities of other people.
So, well, sorry, back up and maybe explain give us a synopsis. What is what was the word? Sociophonetics?
Yeah,
Sorry?
so it is sociophonetics. So
Okay.
it's phonetics being like the science of speech, how the articulators and like our cognitive mechanisms organize the sounds of speech and what we make meaningful. And then sociolinguistics being, how people assert themselves through language, and also how over time, when we look at those patterns, like, things like dialectology, where we can say like on a geographical map, like where are certain ways of speaking organized. Those two things come together in sociophonetics. So we're asking, questions about how people organize themselves with methods based in the science of speech, which is, asking a lot of people very controlled perceptual questions. Yeah, so it's a developing field and developing theory, which I really like introducing students to, because all the questions are still open and valid. We're like at the cutting edge of whatever we're doing here, so there's a lot more to know than what we do know, right?
Okay, I'm going to go totally off
That's
base and ask you something that you may have something, because this is just something that's been on my mind. So I've been reading James, the hot new novel. This is the retelling
yeah.
of Huckleberry Finn from the point of view of Jim the slave, and part of that is it's interesting because the narrator talks about language and using language. The guy in his writing, he speaks at very high levels, very, obviously it's not accurate it's more accurate for today than for then. But he makes the point that, every now and then he slips and he sounds that way in front of a white person, and he tries to make himself sound dumb and it occurred to me, and I've heard of that sort of concept before. And I didn't find it particularly believable, but I accepted it as a construct for the book, so he can have dreams where he's having he has fever dream debating Voltaire and an argument with John Locke and things like that, which is great. But what's that how much of that, I mean, I'm sure some of that was true. You don't want to sound you're a slave. You don't want to sound uppity. You don't want to sound too smart. How do we know how much of that happened?
This is a wonderful question. I feel you are like the third person in as many days who has mentioned this book to me. I'm gonna have to find it. I'm gonna have to get it. Okay, so this absolutely happened. Uppity is the perfect word to describe that kind of behavior. I'm just getting back from giving a talk at NYU about the Black accented standard. I just uploaded it to my YouTube channel if you all want to see it, but it's that variety is like the uppity, has been by Black professionals and Black people described in such a way as you talk this way when you're talking to white people. But there is this like other version of this like other side of that coin where we have Black accented standard where you're using, standard morphosyntax. And then you've got this other Black accented dialect that you absolutely don't use with your community, but you use among Black people. And among empowered listeners, right? Because for about 200 years, it was illegal to teach Black people how to read. And you could literally be drawn and quartered if you were caught with a book. And so if someone was literate, there was a lot of effort in making sure that nobody knew that, right? That every time I talk to you, I am making, predictable errors that are going to lead you towards the perception that I don't know how to read and I've never been educated, right? So you're hiding that aspect of your identity. Absolutely a thing. I think about, I do this in some ways. I think about this in my own production in terms of maybe like my femininity or the ways in which people perceive my age because I'm older than I look, I guess, and sometimes I'll go in and just in trying to get someone to help me or be polite, I'm like, could you explain this to me? Like, I'm so sorry to see this happening or blah, blah. Like you feign ignorance to get aid instead of going in and being like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. And here are the things that I need. Like, it's difficult to go in with like straight up learned directness all the time. And I actually I don't know. I note that in my own production patterns and try and work against it. Right.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so it's not maybe race specific is what I'm getting at.
Right, yeah, and it's not time specific either. I mean, obviously the consequences were much more serious then, but even in recent history, the consequences can be very very problematic, and even today, you're right. I mean, I hear Black friends speaking to each other, and I sometimes just sit back and smile because I listen to the tone changes, the words change. It's just sort of a different way of speaking.
Well, and it's interesting too. I think I have this conversation. This came up in my research, but then also every time I present it, someone will come up and say, like, I do this too. Is that the Black community that I learned my variety in was very much local, was people who worked in the trades and were, farmers or sharecroppers when they were growing up. Like, that's who they were raised by. They did not go to university, and they speak very differently than the Black people that I encountered at university. So when it was like, this is supposed to be my community that's welcoming to me, but I actually don't know how to participate in this elevated Black discourse, which is more rigorous and exacting than the elevated academic discourse in my courses or with these other people. And so I've had a lot of interview participants, Black professionals, talk about how I am more mindful of my language use when I am speaking to other Black professionals than I am with any other group. right? That like somehow I feel like the bar is even higher in
Interesting.
those communities. So it's a really interesting like spectrum on which we sort of situate ourselves and at any day, any conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think, do I do that? And I'm sure I do it in some ways, but it's not, it doesn't, there aren't I don't feel the consequences as a white man that I have to, do something. I mean, I suppose when I speak to people like right now, I'm maybe being a little bit more careful with my speech, but not really. You're all my friends. I don't, it doesn't feel, I don't feel like I do that too much.
Yeah. We certainly all monitor though. I mean, I feel like it's
Yeah.
out of like, yeah, it has a lot to do with how we perceive our interlocutor.
So what's so what's going on? What's new with your students? What are they telling you?
My students, there's a lot going on. So my students are very interested in understanding how it is that a word like DE and I can come to label all sorts of things that acronym maybe doesn't stand for or wasn't produced by,
Yeah.
where it can be like weaponized. I think that they're very interested in that. Um, uh, they keep bringing up this example of that the boat crash. Was that in Baltimore last
Yeah.
year where the boat hit the bridge and
Sure. Hmm.
there was a specific word for that. I'm losing it now, but there's a specific and interesting word for when a boat hits a bridge or you have like a
Yeah.
maritime accident. Anyway,
Somebody in the chat will have to get
someone
that
will
for us.
know, but it's
Yeah.
the Key
The
Bridge
key bridge.
disaster or whatever. They said that was because like of a DE and I hire, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
that these are the kinds of examples that my students are pulling up. They're also talking about like the word retarded is having a renaissance these days where people empower using it, throwing it around like it's
Hmm.
okay to say, and that maybe isn't particularly new. I think it's allision. Yeah. Someone in the chat just said allision. I think it's
Oh right.
allision instead of collision.
Okay.
That was a new word for me, talking about
Right. Me too.
the
Yeah.
boat crash. Yeah, things that have nothing to do with who was in charge, and somehow are being like put on this, and my students are in this place where they're like, how can they do that? Like, how can they just make a word mean something new? And it's like, well, actually, like what we are seeing is just maybe a more visible version of how language changes regularly. And,
Yeah.
you know, yeah,
It is,
it's difficult. It's difficult to live in the moment of it.
yeah, right. And it's like, and I think we've already made the point, but I'll make it again that it's just fascinating that we're seeing word change. It's not in a subtle way, not let's sort of casually move the language the way we want to or start using it differently. It's blatant. We're going to declare this word now, verboten and yeah, or this one acceptable again.
Yeah.
Any new any new slang words that you've picked up that like next year's list for new
You know,
words?
we'll see. I think I get, I've gotten a lot of examples that I will not be able to put in the dictionary. I think that that's not of newer words, but words that were on our list for 2024, which I shared with students, and I keep getting like an influx of memes and examples from them of people using those terms. I also, my students in the profanity class write a lexical history paper and looking at profane words, which is a real challenge because they are incredibly underdocumented across the world's languages, right?
Sure.
And so I actually have someone looking up frickin', which is not really a new word, but it's my first student ever in, 3 iterations of this course who wants to do a minced oath and wants to look at minced oaths.
Most
Yeah.
people want the straight oaths. Is that it?
Yeah, and a lot of people want the straight O's. They want to talk about things that have to do with their own identity. Like I've had,
Yeah.
not to just like mention all the bad words. I don't want to get your
Go ahead.
channel
Go
like
ahead. Everyone,
demonetized.
if you're offended, just turn off the sound. Right.
Well, it's just
What you got?
there are a lot of people who want to talk about a slur that names
Yeah.
them or their community, or they
Mhm.
want to talk about like CUNT and how that word changes, or a word
Yeah.
like slut and how that
Mm.
word changes. Like those are like the perennial examples of words that people are interested in, and like the SHIT compounds. So
Yeah.
you know, head, bag, you know, all this other stuff. And that is all interesting. They're like, they all have their like distinct stories that can be told, and they
Mhm.
change over time. But I'm really excited to see a paper on a minced oath. It's something that's actually, you know, this practice of distancing yourself in polite conversation from a word we all know you couldn't say at the moment.
Right.
It's a fun practice, and you know, as old as English itself.
Right. Right. And so many fun words that are, and so
So
many words
many.
that have come into common use that, oh shoot, I
You know,
mean,
we talk about
they're
like goodness
everywhere.
gracious and
Yeah.
gadzooks and you know, yeah, just so many that you know
Mhm.
don't really think about, but then you're like, oh, of course,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So you were saying that, let's talk a little bit about you, and because I want to get into, I don't want to like skip over stuff. I didn't really give you much of an introduction. But you've been on the show before, and people can,
They
and
know me.
encourage people go back and see our other interviews with you. But so you come from Tennessee. You went to University of Michigan straight from Tennessee. Is that the
No, I went to the University of Kentucky first for my
okay?
master's.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and
Oh,
then
okay.
yeah, PhD at Michigan.
So what did you do your bachelor's in?
I did my bachelor's in English literature. I
Okay.
was focused on uh, um, abstract poetry. I loved like Samuel Beckett
Oh,
and
wow.
like absurdist drama. That was really what I was focused on. And then I did a study abroad program in Ghana, and we had to like develop a research question for while we were there, and I was really interested in nationalism, like the idea of like imagined communities, like the ways in which we imbue our national identity with all sorts of ideals.
Oh, yeah.
And so I went to Ghana, kind of, I don't know, ticked off that I had to like that to cite a question in the real living world, and I came back a linguist. It sounds simple, but that is very much what happened. Is it
Yeah.
and having conversations with people about their lives and how they imagine themselves. Language was at the heart of every answer that I got,
Hmm.
and
Interesting.
yeah, so then I worked with Michael Montgomery on the Dictionary of Appalachian English,
Oh, wow.
as an intern,
Uh-huh.
in that summer in between bachelor's and master's. So
Yeah. So you've been defining and entering words
yeah, the
ever
very
since.
first entry that I worked on was for haint.
Haint?
Yeah, which is like
Nice.
a ghost. Yeah.
It's
So
like I'm
that was
sorry?
yeah, like a ghost, like a haunt.
Oh.
Yeah. And so
Oh.
yeah, it's something that my grandmother used to say, which was it was just um and it's such an affirming experience, because I never thought that anything that just randomly floated out of my grandmother's mouth, again, like this woman who had lived her entire life working the land of Tennessee and never went to school, could be put in a dictionary, could be given that kind of like official
Yeah.
codification. And so, yeah, I caught the bug, and I'll
Hmm.
never take
So to go off track again, words that get into a dictionary, you deal with a lot of words that maybe never get into the dictionary, but some that do. The word of the year, the American Dialect Society word of the year, raw dogging. It's already in the Oxford English Dictionary. It's just and it's an old word with a new meaning. But do you do you get, and I suppose even among like faculty members you run into, I mean, do you get people who just are adamant that certain words shouldn't be in dictionaries and shouldn't get that sort of, vote of approval?
It's interesting. I don't think that I encounter that too much from colleagues. I feel like in some ways I am very isolated. The thing that I encounter from colleagues more often is that it's not that doing that kind of work is not scholarship, or it's not scientific enough
It
to
does seem,
count,
yeah, fun and trendy
you know.
stuff, yeah.
And so that's like the more difficult like argument that I have to make is it's certainly scholarship, and here are the reasons why, but also I have encountered the most pushback from the communities of people that I work with. So when I was interviewing Black professionals, I was asking them questions about like, what does the word finna mean? Finna.
Okay.
What does that word mean? Do you use it? How do you use it? And so many of them were like, that's not a real word.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I don't know what it means for a word to be real, but this word is absolutely in the dictionary, right? And like, let me point to it, and that's maybe not the one and only level of authority we should point to, but for these groups of people, these words that are part of their everyday discourse, they feel like don't have reality. And to me, that's this like really challenging and interesting place to sit in is, I'm so interested in people's impressions of their own language use, how they describe the language that they use, and what they, that like space of feeling like their language is real or their linguistic practice is real. And so like as someone who then turns around to write down what words mean, it is I feel like I take my lesson from John Butters or Ron Butters, who said like words mean what people tell us they mean. And so if the majority of this community of users is telling me that this isn't a real word, then maybe I should listen to them in some sort of way.
But
That's challenging for me as a scientist.
yeah, well, if they're telling you that, but then they're also using it, then what is a word?
It's like, this word isn't real, but I'll tell you exactly what it means, and who uses it, and every time I put it in a sentence, and how to, grammaticalize it right. It's like, okay,
Right.
that's real.
So,
That's a real word.
yeah. So I'm an editor, and and I've always said that, I used to always say as an editor that it's my job to sort of accept that language changes, but not help it change. I mean,
Yeah.
keep I'd be a little bit of a guardian, be a little bit of a no, it's not, and there's a lot of reasons I don't say that partly anymore. Partly, mainly because I'm aware that not everyone reading what I'm editing looks like me and has the same background and has the same comfort with words. So I realize I have to be a little bit more expansive in my thinking. But still, at what point as editors, how do we navigate when to use a word and when is a word not a word yet?
Yeah. That's a challenge. I feel like I do not envy the job that you all have. I am that is not what I like do professionally, is kind of
Right.
and not to say that it's not something I have ideas about, but I think about this a lot when I'm grading. How to, if I like, I understand the point that you made. I just wouldn't have organized the words in this way, or encouraging and empowering students to create in a linguistic variety that feels most comfortable to them, especially when it's something like, I'm just asking you to do a response or a discussion post. Like, I don't need that heightened version
Yeah.
of the language. I want to know what you think. So please share with me the way that you talk or reflect on language use. Like, I don't need you to heighten your language for me. That's not necessarily like editing, but it is this thing of even in these interview settings, it's like, I wonder how close I get to people's like natural or casual speech, or how like close I can ever get to those varieties. And so then that really informs what I measure and what I count, or what I say, this is an emergent pattern like across this group of people, because, maybe, maybe none of them really like agreed with me on the reality of these terms, but then again, like, here's all this usage, it's here, it's this, it's that. It's like it is very difficult to stand in between those two realities and make a choice, especially one that's going to be like systematically consequential down the line when I'm designing an experiment, right?
Yeah.
Has something to do with like our theory about what's universal about the ways in which people use language. So
Well, I mean, in the past, I suppose it was easy because language was what was written down, and we no longer think of it that way. I mean, that's an easy way when you're making the Oxford English Dictionary. You say, well, we have to go to the authors, the cream of the empire authors, and that's the authority. That's an easy thing to say, but then it misses out on, the spoken language, which I think is nowadays is much more significant and important.
and I feel like I'm the opposite, where I'm trying to convince linguists to be like, writing is language use.
Oh, really? It's because
Please prioritize this and find it interesting. It is
well,
that like
it's when it's
speech is
I mean
not
it's
the only thing.
yeah, well, it's not, and I mean it's like it's really two different things. I mean, honestly, if we're being, if we had the unlimited budget, we'd have a spoken dictionary and a written dictionary because
Right.
there are differences, right? That's interesting that there's sort of that maybe a little bit of a pendulum thing going on. If you have any questions, I mean, we're talking like a mile a minute. If you have any questions, please ask them in the chat, and we'll get to them in the room. I don't know if you remember, Kelly, the way we do it. The people ask questions in the chat, and then Sarini sort of lines them up, and then we ask them. And sometimes we get talking so much that people don't have time to write down a question because we're covering everything. But let's talk about. Let's get. We were talking about your history. You were in Kentucky. You did your post. You went to University of Michigan. What was your focus, your research focus at University of Michigan for your PhD?
Yeah, okay. So I did a study on linguistic profiling in the housing market, as like my qualifying research. So for the first 2 years that I was at Michigan, and that study really is about it's no big it's I'm an individual who has multiple dialects at my command, like being from Appalachia and also being African American. And so I followed a model that exists in the literature of they call it like a matched guise. So it's like I give you the same sentence with a different voice and see how you feel about it. And so, but I presented those voices to landlords and looked at the types of access that people received. And so if you call and you say, hello, I'm calling about an apartment I saw available versus, hi, I'm calling about an apartment I saw available, right? You get a different, kind of response pattern. And yeah, so that was my first bit of research. And then my dissertation changed a bit because of the pandemic. So, I was heading in a more like neurological or like cognitive direction, but then we couldn't go to labs or bring anyone anywhere or measure stuff. So I ended up doing interviews, which I'm very grateful for, that I had this shift, because I was able to sit down and at length talk to Black professionals about how they imagine, like conceive of their linguistic repertoire, like how do you use language in your career, and how is it different from the way you use language at home, and how do you recognize someone that's from your city, and is that different than recognizing someone who's just from Michigan, and just all this stuff. And that was like very formative for me, but also I think it was really useful for the community as well, at least like the ways in which they have described it afterwards. And so that research is in meta linguistics, which is just like our talk about talk, the ways in which we
Mhm.
describe our language use is maybe somehow different from just, automatically presenting it. And so that's kind of the area that I find myself in, and what I am writing on now. Hopefully that they're, stay tuned, like papers to be submitted very soon are have come out of the dissertation. And yeah, it just gave me a real window into like locally focused work. So
I was
right
curious
now,
about that.
yeah.
Madison is not the big city. Is that, how do you, are you doing work in Madison at that level?
Yeah, so I'm in the process of developing a lab space, but that lab space is going to be mobile because I don't want to have to ask people to come all the way into the university and pay for parking and sit down with me to have a conversation. I would like to go to them. And also that conversation doesn't have to be an experiment quality recording. That conversation is something else, right? For me to establish the emergent pattern. And so I am, I'm hoping to work with the unhoused population here in Madison. I've done like a semester level project on the unhoused population in Ann Arbor. I am very interested in how these people think about language and the ways that they use it, and also the ways in which, thinking about housing and challenges and the way that your voice is and like how difficult it is. It kind of brings these things together of, you know what are what are the challenges that this community meets when attempting to advocate for themselves and be taken seriously, and just describe their needs in a formalized way that is something that's going to be accessible or accepted by like our state government, which is they are literally sitting outside of panhandling. And so it
Yeah.
is this idea of, can we get you in the door? How do we get you in the door and get you heard? Is my ultimate goal, right? But also just describing a very understudied population of language users is what I'm interested in. So I think that's maybe where I'm headed with the language mobile or bookmobile or wordmobile or
Yeah.
yet to be described.
Elizabeth DeAndrew in the chat called it the linguistics mobile.
Oh, that's nice.
That's a little bit longer, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah, it
see.
might work.
As long as it's not the Badger mobile, no offense, I will be
Yeah, don't want to, no. There could be many, like, I'm sure there's a Badger mobile that does
there
something
must
else
already be.
yeah.
Yeah, and so
Just like
so
there's a Buckeye mobile, I'm sure, here in Columbus.
that's where I'm headed. And once the mobile lab is up and running, hopefully that I can engage with lots of different
Yeah,
Wisconsinites, and people around here. So
yeah, excellent.
lots to talk about.
That kind of leads into our first question from the
Oh,
room.
cool.
We have a question.
Yes, we have a question from Melissa. Melissa, if you're ready. Oh, Melissa, you're on mute.
Hi, thank you for taking my question. And I think that Dr. Wright, in a funny way, addressed part of it. But my question, I mean, just now, my question was about, I would love to have some ready to go sentences as I am with people who are dismissive of how other people talk. And I'm pleased with progress that I've made with myself, dealing with different things on 3 continents. But I really, Dr. Wright, I really like what you said about like helping people feel heard. We want to help people feel heard and get in the door. So if you have a couple of easy sentences for me, like I'm out and about, or I'm with friends, or I'm in the park, or I'm at the library, and I want to say something about accepting the way anyone speaks, anyone, uses language. I would love to have some really simple, polite sentences ready to go. And also, if you have any suggestions, I'm a retired librarian. I would love any suggestions about books to recommend that our public library could buy.
Yeah. Well, thanks for doing that work. I feel like libraries are one of the most sacred places in our civil space. And so, yeah, I'm very, very grateful for that. Okay, so here's a sentence. I don't know how helpful this is, but here's something that I find myself saying over and over again every time that I get interviewed by a journalist who like wants to talk about the word woke or wants to talk about DEI or wants to talk about something, some slang term that they're like, is our language dying? What's happening? And I say language change is continuous and ongoing, right? And that's like maybe not a huge surprise to us, but maybe, people just don't think about it that way. They think about it as static. It's like you said, you write a word down, that's what it means. It's like language change is continuous, ongoing. Language is a natural system that evolves as other natural systems, right? And I equate it to rivers. There's so many good quotes about, do you ever meet a river twice? Like that kind of thing of, can you stand in the same river twice? It's that of like, I can show up at the exact same place and put my feet into the water at the exact same place, but is it the same river? Like it is moving. Which molecule of water here is the real river, right? It's that of like, it is in motion. And so that's one. And then also, I do a lot of work that like calls attention to the ways in which like really specific communities use language, which I feel a lot of people are making appeals to like, that's not how I use it. So I feel like everyone else's way is wrong. And language variation should be celebrated. That's one of my, one of my go-to sentences as well, because again, there's so much more that we don't know about how people are using language than we do. And so every conversation you have with any person gives you more linguistic variation to celebrate. And what's fascinating about that is even with this huge space of variation, we come together, we share ideas, we got people on the moon, right? It very quickly developed a vaccine for COVID. Like it is this kind of thing of coordinated cooperation and shared understanding abounds in the face of inherently individual variation and constant change. So there's something very human in the middle of that must be celebrated, right? And so it's more a space for celebration than consternation. Yeah.
And what about books that
Books.
might be?
Okay. Well, I'll tell you that I am teaching there. The books I am teaching. What the F. Which is by Benjamin Bergen. It's from 2016, and that book is about our swearing our minds and ourselves. Is the subtitle, and it is a really easy read, and it's just a good book. And also Jesse Scheidlauer's has a new edition of the F word,
Yeah.
which I understand is like maybe not the like front and center splashy cover of a library,
Simple
but
cover.
yeah, I'll just say too, I think, right now, like very recently, I got this job like very recently. And one of the first things that I did was I ordered books for my bookshelf over here from like every Black female writer that I had ever heard of who I had not had time to read. Because even, in these last couple years, I've been terrified that I might not even be able to purchase these books. And so like, I don't know if it is like alarmist to say, buy, save, stock up on, the things that, the book about redheads, Julianne Moore's book, Freckle Face, whatever.
The children's book, yeah.
You're kidding. Like
Yeah.
it's that of like there if if everything is on the table, then everything is worth being preserved. Right.
And you do, and we do have a sort of a near monopoly of publishers, and we've seen what big companies can, how quickly they can cave, and sort of
Yeah.
companies are
In fact, so
jettisoning.
everything that's still printable and receivable today, I think is worth. I mean, catch me like, sneaking into the gulag with not pearls and money sewn into my dress, but just manuscripts, right? Like layers and layers of manuscripts, right? But yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, read James, because that's something that
I
he
have
gets
to.
also
I have to.
has finds some books, is able to get some books, and he's very, very thrilled with that. But then, of course, he has to hide them because slaves can't be seen reading books, or they'll be in big trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, last month we went through some of the, we went through all these words, the popular ones. When you do the words of the year, you're getting, and I think you, and I'll ask you this, 'cause you told me this, but you got more this year than usual. You had a good flood of suggestions.
We did. We got a lot more this year, which I was very happy about because, you know, like for a while it kind of it was like lagging. We like weren't getting very many
Yeah.
submissions. I had something like 12 for 4.5 months. And I I was desperate for people to submit, but then at the very end, we got a number of folks who've been keeping a list all year, and that is, what I love is seeing, fighting that recency bias. So yeah, we got something like 330 individual lexemes nominated, which is more than we've had in the past. I can pull up the link to this year's submission survey, which is already available, and you can submit as many times as you wish. So you can keep a list for me, but then also if you have, if you encounter a word, just drop it in. If you want. At any time throughout the year, you can submit as many times as you like. And I really do encourage folks to, get non-languagey people, your friend, your neighbor, your colleague, somebody you randomly, like any and everyone is kind of who I want words from. And I feel like that also happened again this year where we got, people who like describe themselves as like gas station attendants and, just lots of other walks of life that I feel like aren't part of our regular conversation when we talk about what words mean and which words are important. And, I also get a lot of terms, things like, like hope, right? Like if someone is like, what's your word of the year? And they're like, my word of the year is hope for like these reasons. And I just, some of my colleagues will like poo-poo that, but for me, I think it's fascinating. It is a real answer. It's how someone experienced their year. And I love that. And so I feel like nothing is off the table as far as like a word of the year submission goes for me. And my job is to only count stuff. And I will look at every single one of them. I'm going to be looking at them in perpetuity. So they're all interesting.
So the words that were discussed and voted on, there were several dozen that made the list. Did you have a favorite word that didn't make the list?
That's a good question. Let me look. I feel like one of my favorites did make the list, though it's not necessarily a word. It was the bad bill, bleach blonde, butch body.
All right, it was on the list.
Yeah, that did make the list, but that was one of my favorite. It's like so alliterative and exciting. I'm looking at my nominations report right now. One that I did like that did make the list was corn plating.
Corn plating.
Corn plating.
Plating, okay.
And it comes from, it's a reference to the movie Encanto, where there's, the mom is just standing there with this plate of corn in this like important scene. And corn plating is attending to the very specific nuance of something. So people talked about like,
Wow.
she's also holding this plate of corn. Like while they're having this whole discussion about like cultural lifeways, she's standing there with a steaming plate of corn, right? So it is like this overall like, and there's something about, yeah, corn plating is this like idea of like a hypersensitive attention to detail. And I don't know how productive that is. I don't think that people are actually saying it. I think that it's something that showed up in a bunch of TikToks, right?
Yeah.
But I love that idea. And those are my favorite kind of words where it's like, I did not have the word to describe this behavior, but now that you have told me about it, I know exactly what it is. I absolutely participate in it. So yeah, I wish that, you know, corn plating had done a little better in the
Yeah.
overall, but yeah, I don't get to choose. If
Yeah,
I
maybe it was too early for corn plating.
Maybe it was too early for corn plating.
Yeah.
I'm also very grateful that certain things didn't make it, like, you know, like a lot of like the climate and like AI, maybe like focus terms. Like I'm glad that I'm not doing the rounds talking about forever chemicals, even though like maybe those are important things to talk about. I am just glad that it wasn't like the bleaker end of things that, you know, got
Right.
picked up.
Right. Forever Chemical. That's actually, I mean, I didn't think of that. That's a really good one, actually. That should be on
Yeah.
the list, but yeah, I can
mean,
see.
it was certainly nominated, you know, it's like people are paying attention to that kind of thing. We also got like Disease X, which was like the Chinese government preparing for the next pandemic of being like Disease X, like whatever Disease X is like kind of
Yeah.
this thing of like, well, sure, we want our government to be better prepared, but also goodness gracious. And so, yeah, so I'm grateful that I get to talk about raw dog instead of forever chemicals. Like it's a better reality for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how much is, I'm looking at the list. I put the list in the chat for people to look at. How much of this is TikTok?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, interestingly, a lot of it, I think a lot of it maybe comes from TikTok. Because again, like there are so many groups of people we just don't hear from or capture in this survey. And like I don't you know, each year I'm trying something new to try and encourage folks to submit different folks, and but especially like American Dialect Society members who come to the live vote, but they don't really submit nominees. And so
Right.
it's so I do think it skews younger. We also had like a whole group of high schoolers who were there, who had been submitting, who came to the live vote. And so I do think it skews towards online discourse. But I would say in some ways it's like what happens in the chat. So maybe not even TikTok, but like a Twitch streamer or someone or a YouTuber
Yeah.
who like has a, you know, a dedicated community and they've built some sort of lore or ethos, and you know, people are remarking, or like a podcast or something like that that has this, and yeah, some sort of creative usage in that space that like then moves into another space. I think that some of those terms are becoming more common. Which is fascinating. And
Yeah.
also really difficult for us to document. So I really appreciate when people send us screenshots.
Yeah. Is that part of the form that send a
Oh yes.
upload
You can-
screenshots?
You can attach
Yeah.
anything you wish.
Yeah.
You know, and I haven't received anything particularly terrifying or dirty. So, you know, I'm going to leave that open until it becomes live.
Right. Yeah. Well, hopefully that won't happen.
Yeah.
We're pretty much out of time. This has been fascinating and fun and wonderful. Is there? I'm trying to remember what I didn't write stuff down. Was there something else we wanted to talk about that we said at the beginning that we should talk about? I don't.
No, I mean, I feel like you didn't get a conversation about slang, but you know, next time.
Yeah, next time.
Yeah.
Come back next month. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean we didn't, did we? But you know, slang is always changing. It's always new and
Yeah.
always fresh, and it'll be there for us next time. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. I think we have, I think the one technical problem we have is that we failed to have the outtake and the closing credits where we play the music again. And everybody loves the music, everybody loves the theme song, and so I feel terrible about that. But you know, Heather usually puts that together, and we just slipped through the cracks. So we will we'll just close out with the beginning credits again, and we will get John Kelly on the show at some point because I've been meaning to talk to him for a long time. We actually did do a show with John Kelly and Heather Bonikowski when they were both with dictionary.com, and I think it's probably a couple of years ago now. So you can look that up, but we'll definitely get him back and talk to him again. And we'll do another, maybe we'll get him next month, maybe we'll do a different show next month. We'll have to see. So, but thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Wright. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me back.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.